Good evening, everybody. Hag Sameach. Okay. You guys hear me okay?
Kavod Harav, how are you? Yes, we do.
Baruch Hashem. Okay, very good.
Yes.
Very good. Okay. Yesterday we did Aleph. I think there's another Shulchan Aruch that has to be done. Also, Bet maybe. Let's check that. Okay, so it says a Shulchan Aruch like this. Hadlaka ose mitzvah, right? When is the mitzvah done? When you light the candles, right? That's a crucial time. לפיכך, so it says, therefore, אם כבתה קודם שעבר זמנה, אינו זקוק לה. So therefore, if it went out, the candle, before the time passed, what does that mean? We didn't get a half hour of the candle. We only got, a couple of seconds or whatever, a couple of minutes, and then it went out. So he's not really obligated to relight it. Why is that? Even though it wasn't lit for a half hour, but since when you lit it, it had that potential there. Since there was enough oil there to light for a half hour, so therefore you're not obligated to relight it. Okay, so if he wants to relight it, he could, right? No problem. Not obligated. So what does that mean? He should do it without a blessing, right? Why? Because since he already fulfilled his obligation the first time, now he can light without a blessing, just to enjoy the light, whatever he wants to, look at it, whatever. So that's fine. So then he goes on. ואפילו כבתה בערב Shabbat, even if it went out Erev Shabbat, which is Friday, right? קודם קבלת Shabbat, before taking on Shabbat. So שעדיין הוא בעוד יום, and it's still daytime, אינו זקוק לה. So what does that mean? He could still relight it if he wants. It's not Shabbat yet, but nevertheless he's not obligated. So why does he talk about Shabbat here, Erev Shabbat? One of the reasons is because on Erev Shabbat we light early, right? Usually we light, once after dusk, right? Stars come out, blah blah blah, right? But here on Erev Shabbat we're lighting in the daytime. That means like up to 1 hour before sunset, we can still light, and still, even though you lit it during the daytime, you're still not obligated to relight it now. That's the idea. וכן אם לאחר שהדליק הבעל לתקנה וקיבע אותה בשוגג. Also, another scenario which is similar to that, we talked about this in Bet Yosef, that let's say after he lit it, he came to fix it up a little bit. And I don't know, something didn't work out right. Right? Let's say, the flame is too small, so he wants to fix it up. And by mistake, right? By mistake, he put it out. This happens all the time. Things like this with candles. And also kukla, he still doesn't have to relight it. Why is that? Because since he didn't do it on purpose, it just happened, by mistake. So it's the same thing as the first scenario that we discussed, right? And even though it's a little bit different, but the result is the same thing. The result is that you're not obligated to relight it. Okay, good. Then it says the Ramah here, ואם רוצה להחמיר על עצמו, he wants to be stringent. We talked about this, right? ולחזור ולדליקה אין לברך עליה, right? As we said, same thing the Ramah says here, that if you want to relight it, even though you're not obligated, don't bless, right? Because you're not obligated to light anymore. There's no way to bless over here again. You only bless once. Okay, very good. That's a Shulchan Aruch. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, we'll go on to Gimel. So here's Gimel. So it says over here, Rabbi Meir Mirotenburg. Yeah, I think we should see also the tour here. There's a tour also here. So it says like this in the tour. The Rabbi Meir Mirotenburg, right? This rabbi, we already mentioned, right? He was the rabbi of the Rosh. He was living in Germany. לא היה מדליק בנר של חרס אלא בשל מתכת. So he says he didn't like to use this rabbi a candle which is made out of earthenware, right, or clay. Rather, he preferred to use metal, right, metal candles. So the truth is, most of the ones that we have today, the menorahs, are made out of metal. So, you're really gonna have a hard time finding one that's made out of clay. They still do exist, but they're not so common, You can find it, but not so common. Most of them today are all metal, either right, they're made out of tin or right, or some kind of alloy or whatever it is, right? And then it's plated, with silver, or they plate it with something, make it look shiny. All kinds of techniques, right? That they use today. The technology, Baruch Hashem, today is very good. So you can do a lot of amazing things with cheap materials and make it look beautiful. So anyway, right, as we said, he liked metal better. כשלא היה אלא של חרס, היה לוקח חדשים בכל לילה. So it says, if it was made out of clay, then what he would do is he would change it every night and put a new one. So what's the reason why he did that? כשלא היה חדשים, היה מסיקן באור דהבו כמו חדשים, right? So it says, another thing he says is that when he didn't have a new one, let's say he didn't have, so then what we would do is he would take the clay candle and he would singe it like with fire, like to burn out the stains, whatever, right? Those black spots. So it shouldn't look like it's used, it shouldn't look like it's burned. That's the idea. So it says, what's the reason why he did all this, right? What was the purpose of that? So it says in Masechet Sofrim, En Madlikin Bener Yashan. You shouldn't use, right, for Hanukkah, an old candle. So what does that mean? Try to use new ones. Why? Because, the old ones are already, burned and singed, they look ugly, they look black, they're all blacked out, right? So you don't want to use those again, right? It doesn't look nice. So therefore, right, get a new one, right? So, I guess the same thing would apply to our cups that we use, if you're using oil, right? We use those cups that you can buy in the store. So, sometimes those cups get burned, like they get charred, whatever, black. So if they are like that, you should try to, either clean it or get a new one, because otherwise it's going to look ugly for the next year, whatever it is, right? So you want to, change them every year, at least, at least that much, right? Unless you can clean them good, whatever. Or if they're clean as it is, sometimes they remain clean. Depends on, how you use it and how you lit it. It all depends on, right, a lot of things. For instance, like this year, I bought something that I don't usually use, I bought like plastic cups. And the wicks are like in the middle, with those sticks, those hollow metal sticks that put the wicks inside. So, my experiences from using this kind of thing, they don't really get dirty at all because the fire doesn't really touch them at all. So it seems like they're just like totally clean, So, it's like whatever. I mean, they're very cheap, they cost like $4 or $5. So I don't know if I'm going to keep them for next year, but right, technically speaking, I could, because they're all clean, so we'll just have to wash out the oil, whatever. But it's sort of a headache anyway. So, a lot of people, prefer not to do that. Whatever it is, anyway. It depends on how you used it and what you used and what kind of material it was, and what kind of wicks there were there, and all kinds of things, right? There's all kinds of issues there. So anyway, right, in those days, this was their scenario. So so says the Masechet Sofrim further on, En lo rak yashan. Let's say he only has old ones, right? Doesn't have melabeno beor yafeh. Be'ur yafeh. Right. So then, right, she says you should clean it with fire, singe it, like whatever, right? So you see from there that right, this rabbi, what he was doing is backed up by the Talmud, right? Because that's what we see over there in Masechet Sofrim. Okay. V'satam ner shehu shel cheres. So he says we're talking about, the average candle, which is made out of clay, right? In those days, anyway, that's the way it was. Today, not so much. Right? You can hardly find any clay today, any clay candles. It's all metal. Everything is metal. Hilkach cheres. So he says, therefore, so if you're using metal, that's what he says, right? You don't really need a new one because, the metal stays intact. Doesn't really get burnt out like that, it doesn't get damaged. So he says if you have like glass, right, or or clay, which is overlaid, right, overlaid clay, which is has a coating, right? It's coated. So something like that, he says it's like metal, in other words, they don't really get dirty. Only like bare clay, which is not coated, it does get dirty. So, okay, yeah, so you get the idea what he's trying to say here. So that's the end of the tour. Let's see now the Bet Yosef. So, Yosef. Ken Katu Be'agot Maimoniot. It's also written in this place, also this rabbi, Begam Ben Mordechai, also there, Perek Bameh Madlikin, right? In this Perek in the Masechet Shabbat, as we said. Ubeshibole Aleket, right? Also in this book, So they all seem to pretty much agree with this rabbi, what he said, that better not to use clay, right? As we said, unless you're gonna singe it out, and get the black stuff out of there, which is hard to do. You don't want to spend so much time on things like this. We've got better things to do in our life, so you want to avoid that as much as possible, right? That's pretty much what we're saying. Okay, good. So that's Gimel. We also have Dalet, but let's see first the Shulchan Aruch. So says Shulchan Aruch in Gimel, Ner shel cheres shedlik bo laila echad. It says like this, right? If you lit with a right clay candle, right, one night, Naaseh yashan, right? So it becomes old, right? Because as we said, right, gets ugly and blackened. Then madlikin bo laila acheret. So you shouldn't use it another night, right? To switch it, right? And get a new one. Ela lokeach chadashim bechol laila, right? Every night put new ones there. Ve'im en lo ela yashan. If he has only old ones, what should he do, right? Doesn't have a new one. Mesiko bechol laila ba'ur. So then he should singe it out with fire, and clean it out with fire. Get all the stains out there, whatever. So he says, when it comes to metal, though, you don't need it, right? Because it stays intact. So it says if you're using glass or coated clay, so it's the same thing as metal, right? It won't get damaged by the fire. Okay, good. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, we'll go on to the next one, which is so it says in Dalet here in the Bet Yosef, Katab od b'shibbolei leket, right? So it says in this book, Shibbolei leket. En choshishin ptilat v'lechalifin lechalifan ad shetichle. Oh, so he says when it comes to the wicks, though, you don't really need to switch them every night, right? You could use the older wick until it gets like used up, nothing left over, right? You can't use it anymore. So you see from there that you're allowed to use old wicks, right? As long as they're intact, and they're still usable. You don't have to switch them every night, like we talked about the candles, because no harm comes out of it. It burns well. In fact, sometimes the older wicks, sometimes they burn better even. Why is that? Because they're already full of like saturated with oil, and they're also, what do you call it? They're also have been already lit one time, so it's easier to light them again, to relight them. So because of that, that's why the Ashkenazim, they have this custom that when they light Shabbat candles, what they do is the husband, comes, like before the wife lights the candles, he just like lights it up, lights up the wicks and puts them out. Why is that? Because then for her, it's easier to relight them when it was already lit before. So that's why some Ashkenazim have this custom, that the husband comes and lights it beforehand in order to make it easier for his wife, to light it again afterwards. It just goes faster, when you're relighting it, it goes faster. So that's the story there, right? So I think you got the idea. So let's see the Shulchan Aruch. So it says, right, "En choshi leptilot el chalifam ad shetichle." So as we said, right, again, we're not really concerned when it comes to the wicks, right, to switch them every night. You don't have to do that. If they're intact and they're usable, right, that they're still big enough, whatever, right, you can reuse them for several nights. There's no problem with that. Okay, very good. That's the end of the chapter. So now we'll go to the next chapter. So says the Tur here, Madlikin mener lener bedafka bener atzmo. So he says you're allowed to light from one candle to another. So he says, but that's only the candle itself. You're allowed to light one from the other. But you're not allowed to use the Chanuka candles to light something, which is a candle like mundane, right? Not a mitzvah. So since all the Hanukkah candles are a mitzvah, you can light from one to the other. But when it comes to the other candles, right? You shouldn't light from the Hanukkah candles to another candle, which is mundane, not a mitzvah matter. That you cannot do. אבל אסור להדליק בה נר אחר של חול, אפילו להדליק נר אחר של חנוכה, right? So he says you can't even do that if you're going to do it as an intermediary. What does that mean? You'll light like one mundane candle, and then from there, you'll light another Hanukkah candle. Even that you can't do. It's indirect. It says, Kol sheken she'en להדליק בה נר אחר של חול לצורכו. All the more so you shouldn't light like a mundane candle for his own needs. So he says, ובספר התרומה, in this book, he says, התיר להדליק מנר לנר על ידי של חול. He does allow, right, this rabbi to light from one candle to another Hanukkah candle, even though you're going through an intermediary, which is not a mitzvah candle, right? So we see that there's a dispute, right? According to the first opinion, you're not allowed to do this. According to this opinion, right, which is a minority opinion, you're allowed to do it. לחשיב נר של שבת. Right, so I'm sorry, I whispered it. I'll read it again. לחשיב נר של שבת ושל בית הכנסת כולם של מצווה. So he says, right, that when it comes to the candles of Shabbat and the candles of the synagogue, they're all considered to be mitzvah. So therefore, you can light from one to the other. They're all mitzvah, right? Hanukkah, right? The Shabbat, and also the synagogue, right? That's also mitzvah, because it's a mitzvah to have lighting in the synagogue. So people can, pray, right? And read their Sidur, see what they're doing. So he says the Rosh agrees with the first opinion, doesn't allow that. Okay, very good. So that's the end of the tour. It's a short chapter. Let's go to bed, Yosef. Yeah. So says Bet Yosef over here. Where is the source for this? It's also there in Shabbat, Chav Bet Amud Aleph. Itmar Rav Amar, it says over there, Rav says, En madlikin miner lener. You're not allowed to light from one candle to another, right? Ushmuel Amar madlikin. Shmuel says you're allowed to. Amar Abaye kol mile demor avid kerav levar mehane telat leavid kishmuel. So this rabbi says, right, Abaye, that in general, right, we paskin like Rav. But here we go like Shmuel. There's three things that we do like Shmuel. One of them is this one, right? Which is what? That you're allowed to light from one candle to another. One of the rabbis sat before this rabbi, and he says, what's the reasoning of Rav, who does not allow it? Mishum bizu mitzvah, because you're disgracing the mitzvah like that, right? Lighting from one to another. Amar lehu lo tatzitu le. But this rabbi tells them, don't listen to what he says, this rabbi. Tameh derav mishum bizu mitzvah, derav mishum demachish mitzvah. So he says the reason of Rav is something else. So we'll see what that is, right? Rashi explains, machish mitzvah. What does that mean? Umichse keman de shakil nehora veshoeb ktsat milachlochit shemano. So he says, right, the reason is like this, that it looks like somebody who is taking a flame and vacuuming it, like, pulling it out, sucking it out. And he's also, pulling out the oil as well. So why is that such a bad thing? Let's see what that means. My benayu, what's the difference between these two reasonings? The kam madlik misharga lesharga, that he lights from one candle to the other. The one who says it's because you're disgracing the mitzvah. Misharga lesharga madlik. From one candle to another, you can do it. Why? Because they're both mitzvah. There's no disgrace. But the one who says it's because of this issue that we mentioned, you're pulling out the oil. Misharga lesharga nami asur. It will be forbidden even to do from one candle to another, from one Chanuka candle to another. Rashi explains, Misharga lesharga mevi ner etzel ner. He brings one candle next to the other. Ushteen shel mitzvah. They're both mitzvah, belo bekisam. And not with a twig, he says. The Otvina b'Gemara. So we asked in the Gemara, Leman de'amar mishum achushe mitzvah. According to the one who says that it's because of sucking it out, as we said, right? The asikna, and the conclusion of the Gemara is there bekashia. It's right. In other words, it ends up in a question mark, right? Ubata achi ba'ed talmuda. So then the Talmud asks, "My have Allah," right? Now, what's the halacha, right? Do we paskin like Rab or Shmuel? Umeadrinan amar Ravuna bered Rav Yoshua. So this rabbi answers, "Chazina hadlakat ose mitzvah madlikin mirer leler." So he says, if lighting is the mitzvah, then we can light from one candle to another. But if placing it as the mitzvah, we shouldn't light from one candle to another. So the conclusion is that the lighting is a mitzvah, as we already mentioned already. That's a crucial time. So therefore, right, the conclusion seems to be that you're allowed to light from one candle to another, right? At least when it's a mitzvah, right? At least that much. The Kataba Rosh says the Rosh, Betema Maika Mibaile, right? So he says it's a wonder. Like, what is he asking here in the Talmud? My Hava Allah. In other words, why is he asking what the halacha is, right? Because the truth is, and we already said in the Talmud what the halacha was. We said the halacha was like Shmuel.
So I don't understand, Reuben. It looks like he lost hair from his beard.
So, what do you call it? Tabarosh, my kami baile, my hava ale. So then, what is he asking, right? What did he right? What was the conclusion? Right. So it implies that the halacha is like Shmuel, right? We already said so. Right? Since Rabba did like him, Aliba de Shmuel Mibaya, that we're asking according to Shmuel, right? Does he hold that the reason is because of disgracing the mitzvah? Velo plige, and there's no conclusion, there's no right machloket there, there's no dispute. So he says, but when it comes to right the reason that we said that he's pulling from one to the other, that we already asked about this. So therefore, right, the dispute is really talking about the bizu mitzvah. So, right, he says that there is to say that he had a doubt whether this was a true conclusion, right? What we said in the Talmud at the beginning, or lo, or not. Upashit Rav Huna bered Rabbi Yoshua, and he answers this rabbi, the lav tiyufta gemurahi, that it wasn't really a true conclusion there in the beginning. Oh, lechumra, and therefore it goes right stringently. Amar the plige be'achushe, that they're arguing about pulling it out. Ushmuel itle tama. Right. So now, right. I just want to tell you, right. This achushe business, right. What's the word? What does the word achushe mean in right in English? It means in Hebrew, whatever. Right. What does it mean in Hebrew? It means that you're weakening the candle. So what does that mean? That by pulling out the oil, from there, you're weakening the flame, making it weaker. So that's the problem. That's the reason why they don't want you to do it according to this reasoning. So either way, right? Itle tama de bizu mitzvah hilkach hanacha ose mitzvah. So therefore, it says if placing it as a mitzvah, en modlikin minei leneh. We shouldn't light from one candle to another. Ve'havale kemo kinsa. So it's like right, we punish you for that. Or alternatively, he's asking, do we rely on Rava the Abid Kishmuel, who's doing like Shmuel, or Dilma Ilchata Kerav, or is halacha like Rav the Isure? So now there's another question, right, which is that generally, right, when it comes to prohibitions, when there's a machloket, when there's a dispute between Rav and Shmuel, we go like Rav. And here, what we're saying is we should go like Shmuel, right? That's what we said in the beginning. So now the question is, right, why is that? Because in general, we do like Rav. Upashit, so he answers, Rav Huna Bered Rabbi Yoshua. This rabbi answers, the Hilchata Kerav, halachas like Rav, Bizui mitzvah plige. They're arguing about disgracing the mitzvah, the Lishna de Achushe itotav, because the language of weakening was already pushed out. So therefore, if the mitzvah is the lighting, madlikin minei lener, so then we write the light from one candle to another. But if placing it is the mitzvah, the havale kemo kinsa, and so then it's like a punishment, whatever. V'hen madlikin, it's a fine. V'hen madlikin lehanetre shinuye. And we don't write light one to the other. According to these two answers, madlikin mishag l'shag, we can light from one candle to another. Avalo aledeh kinsa, but not when it comes to okay. Now I see, right? The word kinsa doesn't mean what I told you in the beginning. Kinsa is not knas, right? I thought it was like language of knas, which means like a fine, but kinsa means a twig, right? So what it means is that you're using an intermediary, something in the middle, to light by way of some intermediary twig from one candle to another. And that's the opinion of the Rif. So it says, Lo hevi ela lashon machloktam. And that's why he only brought the language of the dispute, madlikin miner laner, that we can light from one candle to another. Mashma bener atzmo. That implies only the candle itself. But now not by way of a twig. So he says, but the Baal Truma allows even by way of a twig, as we said, right in the Tur. According to his opinion, because according to the one who says that it's talking about weakening the candle, Amad bekusha or plige bebizui mitzvah, and they're arguing about it stood in a question mark, and they're arguing about disgracing the mitzvah. V'ilchata kishmuel, halachas like Shmuel, keban de Rabba avid kivateh, since Rabba did like him. Okay, interesting. Let me just see. Okay, let's finish this off. It's a little bit left here. So, the Aran Katab Madlikin Minei Lener, and the Ran says, right, that they're lighting from one candle to another. You can do that. Even by way of a twig, right? Intermediary. Shara, it's allowed. Because we conclude in the Gemara that the reason of Rav the Amar and Madlikin Mishum Bizu Mitzvah. The reason of Rav was because of this disgracing the mitzvah. and that's only by way of a twig. Hu de asar. Deilo miner Chanuka lener Chanuka. So he says he only forbids by way of a twig, because going straight from one Hanukkah candle to another, below kinsa, without a twig intermediary, leka bizu mitzvah. There's no disgrace to the mitzvah there. Umina de Shmuel, afilu alidei kinsa share. So you see from there that according to Shmuel, even by way of a twig, it's allowed. Vezuhi ashita mechuberet. So he says this is the proper approach in the Gemara, in the Talmud, the Gemara. Below ken dat Ramban, but the Ramban doesn't agree with this. Shkatav de la maskana alidei kinsa asur. So the Ramban says no. By way of an intermediary, it's forbidden. Katav ve'Rambam katav madlikin miner Chanuka lener Chanuka. So the Rambam says, right, we can light from one Chanuka candle to another. That's what the Rambam says. Katav alav Rabbi, says the Rabbi, even by way of a twig, he says. So he says, and they have a dispute because the Rambam doesn't say that you can use a twig. So therefore, right, they have a machloket according to the Gemara. So he says we're not going to talk about this at length. So therefore, right, we see that there's several opinions here regarding if you're allowed to use an intermediary or not. Right? It seems like the halacha is that you're not allowed to. Let's see. We'll check the Shulchan Aruch. והתוספות כתבו, and so תוספות, שמה מינה הדלקת עושה מצווה. You see from there that the lighting is the mitzvah. ואם כן, מותר להדליק מנר לנר. So therefore you're allowed to light from one candle to another. בכל מקום, כיוון שנוהגים העולם להחמיר, so he says, nevertheless, right, in any case, since the custom is to be machmir, to be stringent, and לשנות המנהג, so we shouldn't change it, right? Okay, so good. So you see, right, that the tendency is here to go stringent. Okay, very good. So let's see Shulchan Aruch and we're done.
Kavod haba. So what does Rambam suggest to light from candle to candle?
The Rambam, it seems to imply that you cannot do that since he doesn't, right, he doesn't say you can do it that way.
So what does he suggest, though?
So you can only direct directly from one candle to another.
Okay.
You know, I mean, you don't really need to do this, because you can just light a new match, or whatever.
Right. No, but it's nice to understand,
Yeah, sure, right. So according to the way they understood the Rambam, it seems like he's stringent about that.
Thank you.
Because the Rabbi seems to be lenient, right? So that implies that the Rambam is stringent.
Thank you.
Anyway, right, let's see the Shulchan Aruch. It would be nice to look inside the Rambam and and see the language there. But I'm not going to do that now. It's not really so necessary. So let's just go to the Shulchan Aruch. We gotta go to a new chapter. Right, so it says like this, Shulchan Aruch. Madlikin ner Chanuka miner Chanuka, right? We light from one Chanuka candle to another. But dafka leadlik mizeh lezeh. That's only from if you're going straight from one to the other, right? As we said, below inside, without some intermediary. But if you're going to go through some intermediary, which is mundane, asu, it's forbidden, right? So that's the way it goes, right? Stringent. So some allow even this, right? There's also another opinion. שיש לחוש שיכבה הנר של חול קודם שידליק נר של חנוכה. Unless, right, there's a concern that the mundane one will go out before he relights the Hanukkah candle, right? So according to this opinion, you're allowed to, but the halacha is like the first opinion. So therefore, we should be stringent about this. So says the Rama here, right? So says the Rama, the Ashkenazim, their custom is that they don't even light from one candle to another. Straight ahead, right? Says, what's the reason why? Because the real mitzvah is only one, the rest is just additional, it's like, so therefore, right, it's not really the same level of mitzvah. The new one and the old ones are not the same level. So therefore he says you shouldn't light from one to the other. So this only applies when they're right within a half hour of the mitzvah. As we say, right after a half hour, the mitzvah is already over. But once the time of the mitzvah goes by, a half hour, so then they're allowed to get benefit from them, so there's no problem. You can do whatever you want. All the more so you can light from them, right, to another candle. So you see, right, that the Ashkenazim are even more machmir. The custom by them is they don't do any of this, right, at all, except when the time runs out, right, after the half hour. But by us, the Sfaradim, what we do is that we do light one to the other directly, right, but not indirectly. Okay, so that's the way it goes. Okay, thanks for coming. Be blessed with wealth, health, happiness. See you tomorrow, B'ezrat Hashem, and we'll continue. And Chazaku Baruch. Pray for the soldiers and pray for the army. Pray for the Jewish people, and we will be victorious, B'ezrat Hashem, just like we were on Chanuka. Amen, amen.
Kabbalah, thank you so much.
All the best.